Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. 250 million Americans live in or around urban areas. That means more than 3/4 of the U.S. population shares just 3% of the land. All these people living in cities. Where does the food come from? It comes from farms, but where are those farms located? Many of those farms are located in California's Central Valley. The Central Valley produces 1/3 of all the produce grown in the United States. But what if a majority of the vegetable production didn't take place in places like the Central Valley and on mega farms? What if it took place right where we live, in the cities that surround us? Urban and suburban areas are filled with empty spaces. We can let those spaces be assets or liabilities. The solution is in our hands. The resources lie all around us. And that's what this show is about, being an active, positive part of the solution. This is the story of one farmer, an urban farmer who's being part of the change. This is the story of Curtis Stone. Curtis is an urban farmer who farms 15,000 square feet in Canada. He's been farming for 5 years. What he does is profitable. What he does fills a need within his community. What he does is be part of the solution. We're going to follow Curtis on a journey through a full farm season, taking you behind the scenes to see what being an urban farmer is really like. It isn't always glorious, but it's real. Stay tuned and enjoy the journey. Welcome to the Urban Farmer, Week 3. I'm your host, Diego. We're a few weeks into the farm season with urban farmer Curtis Stone, and it's becoming clear that urban farming is all about efficiency.
Yeah, I don't want to have any weeds at all. I don't want to spend any time on my farm that I'm not getting paid for. That's really what I target with my production.
That makes sense, because when there's a limited amount of labor and a finite amount of space that you can farm, and orders that have to be filled, you have to focus on the task at hand and be efficient. You can't hide behind extra land and surplus production because they don't exist in this type of farming model. This is one of the reasons why urban farming works. It works because this model is an efficiently managed bio-intensive system of crop production. And that's a key part of the story and of urban farming. Urban farming is a business. For Curtis, it's a career, not a hobby. He supports himself doing this. This is his job. And in order to make that possible, he has to run it like a business. And that includes time management.
I know what to be concerned with and what not to be. And so the thing that is really different for me even this year that I'm doing more methodically than in other years is really using my calendar.
You have to be disciplined and you have to plan out your week and your days. Technology can help with that, but managing time on the farm isn't always as easy as it sounds. When you run a multi-location farm, there's a lot of travel involved going from place to place, plot to plot. And that travel takes time. Sometimes that time's very precious. So a big part of the planning involves when are you going to do what work, where?
And that's the thing with being multi-locational with my farm is that generally speaking, it's better to get done as much as you can at that one particular plot so you don't have to go back to it the next day. So generally, that's how I'm trying to do it. And so I'm moving things around on the calendar as that's happening.
In this episode, we're going to talk about time management. We're going to talk about how Curtis manages and maximizes his efforts on the farm by staying organized, and how he's switching his beds over this year from a high-tillage strategy to a no-till strategy.
One thing I will say about tilling is that it makes it a hell of a lot faster to prep beds. The problem with it that I see on the production end, and so forget all the stuff you hear about destroying the microbes and all that stuff that's bad for the soil, and I agree that it is bad for the soil. But the most practical reason to not till is because of weed pressure, because soil is essentially a bank of weed seeds from hundreds of years. Every time you rototill it, you invert the layers and you bring up all these weed seeds and you create more problems for yourself.
Let's join the show when it's Tuesday, March 31st, and the first farmers market's coming up in 4 days. What's Curtis up to? Just
getting things ready. Fortunately, I'm doing a pretty limited product list, but there's still quite a bit of diversity in there. Yeah, it's actually to be honest, there's not too much going on to get ready for market. It's more like balancing all the other setup things that I have to do and then finding time to get the market stuff done, just because there's so much other stuff going out on the field with all the setup of different plots, irrigation, laying down mulch and landscape fabric and turning over beds and all this stuff, that getting ready for the market is kind of like, okay, let's cram it all into Friday and just do it all there. Because, it's not like there's so many things that I need to harvest that I have to travel to a bunch of different plots and whatnot like I normally would. So it's, it's more just kind of balancing what else is happening.
Do you feel a lot of pressure this time of year knowing that the market season's coming up, and maybe this is true, maybe it's not, that a lot of the work that you do now will carry on throughout the whole season? So do you feel like there's a lot of pressure to make sure that, one, everything gets done and it all gets done right now, knowing that the clock is running as we advance towards spring?
No, to be honest, I don't. I did when I started. Now, this is my 6th year, so this has become pretty routine for me. So no, I don't feel that pressure. I'm cranking hard and working like long days right now. I'm working on the field from 9 till 7 really, with maybe a half-hour lunch in the middle there somewhere. But no, it's just I work relaxed, but I work hard and efficient, and there's not much pressure at this point really.
How do you think your farm prep's changed over the years since you started farming initially? Is there just stuff you've eliminated, or have you become more efficient in what you do, or you know what to worry about and what not to worry about?
That's exactly it. I know what to be concerned with and what not to be. And so the thing that is really different for me even this year, that I'm doing more methodically than in other years, is really using my calendar. So I just use the calendar on my computer that's synced to my phone, and every single day I'm structuring my day and the next day with blocks on the calendar, and basically what's priority, what needs to get done now, what can be held off a couple days, okay, what didn't get done today, okay, that's going to get bumped to the next day. Really having a structured work day, I find, is really important, because when you've got the whole farm to set up, you go outside and you go, oh my God, there's so much to do. I could just stand in one place here and do 10 different things. I go out my backyard and it's a mess. There's stuff all over the place, but I'm like, okay, focus. What's important? What needs to get done to make the production rolling, and then go on the less important things later. So that's really what I'm doing now. As far as setup goes, things that I'm doing this year that are going to be a lot better going forward is the no-till stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into. And the other thing is I'm basically landscape fabricing my entire perimeters of all of my plots. So I'm basically eliminating all weeding work that isn't in the bed. And by doing the no-till, I'm also eliminating weeding work that's in the bed. So it's a little bit more work going in, setting up. I've got a new employee or a new guy working with me this year, and we've spent already 2 full days on one 2,000 square foot plot, getting it set up, getting the beds all prepped. It's all going into stale seed beds, so all the beds are getting watered and they're going to be tarped tomorrow. So that'll be 2.5 days on that. But we've basically totally, edged the perimeter where the grass there's like a patch of grass around all it. So we basically landscape fabric the entire perimeter, really worked the beds, leveled the soil out better, really worked this place. And going forward, there's going to be no work to do at this plot except what's in the beds. And so that's what I want. I don't want to spend time with a line weeder or a weed whacker going around doing that stuff in the summer. Like, I'd rather be at the beach. So that's basically what we're trying to do this year, is put in a little bit more time at the beginning setup period to make all the plots less work going forward.
There's a lot I want to touch on there. So first, let's go to the weed issue. It's obviously a big problem if you're going to the trouble to landscape it, you're switching to this no-till method. But how much of an issue is weed pressure outside of your actual planting beds? Is it the worry that it looks unruly? Is it a worry that you get seeds coming into your production plots?
That's it. The problem is weeds. Weeds are exponential, right? One weed will drop 1,000 seeds. So if I have, and there's a certain element of that you can't control, right? Things blow in from all over the place. The nice thing is in the city that I do get a lot less weed seeds blowing in from the outside. So I'm good in that regard. So I want to manage my perimeters. So that's my number one thing, because most of my plots, if they have any other land that I'm not farming, it's usually well-maintained lawn. And so the weeds there aren't an issue. So the issue for weeds are these perimeter areas where there's often 3 feet outside of the beds that's just kind of dirt. I rototilled it up when I formed the plot out, but I need to have a little bit of space on the perimeter of plots, to turn machinery around, or just to have an area to put tools or totes when I'm harvesting and stuff like that. So basically just covering all that up so there's no weeds in that perimeter whatsoever that are ever going to go to seed. And so that's why I found the landscape fabric to be just more of a practical way to take care of that. Because, yeah, sure, I could go and use wood chips or something like that, but that's a lot of schlepping. That would make this job that we've spent 2 days into an entire week. And so that, and also, fuel to move around the chips back and forth. So the fabric's a lot easier because one guy can lay down a perimeter in a day or less than a day. So that's a lot more appealing to me. But yeah, it's basically the weeds that are coming from the near perimeter. I don't want to have any weeds on my plots because that's going to make less weeds on my beds. But I combat that with the stale seed bedding and the flame weeding and all that. But, yeah, I don't want to have any weeds at all. I don't want to spend any time on my farm that I'm not getting paid for. That's really what I target with my production.
So you're obviously going after high efficiency here. And something I want to talk about related to that is this idea of calendaring out the day, because this is something I'm personally interested in. And I think a lot of people struggle with this same thing. I know I do. You go outside or you show up somewhere to do a job, and there's 100 different ideas in your head of what's got to be done. And you can spend forever just trying to even start on one thing and get lost in doing the non-important stuff. So how do you, getting technical here and probably going into more detail than we need to, how do you plan out the week in terms of the calendar? Do you sit there and say, here's what I have to get done Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then allocate in literally every minute of the day in blocks all the way through?
Yep. Every minute of the day, man. What I do is usually on Sunday night, I might spend half an hour to an hour, because throughout the week, I'm always making lists. So like I said before, my smartphone is my most used tool on my farm. And so I'm making voice memos of, remember to do this, remember to do that. One thing I'm using a lot more of, which I found handier than using my voice memos, is I just use the voice recognition software on the phone. So on the iPhone, it's Siri. So, I hold the button down, then I go, add to calendar, do this and this and this. Or remind me when I get home to do this and this. Remind me in the morning to do this, whatever it is. Usually it's add to calendar things, and so I just add stuff to my calendar. And then, so on Sunday, planning the next week, I've already got a list of things that I know need to happen. There's things that are routine that always are in the calendar, like plant microgreens these days, soak the seeds these days, prep beds on Monday and Tuesday. Like there's harvesting, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's always things that are stock that happen at certain times, delivering to the restaurants, packing for the farmers market, all those kind of things. But all the other stuff needs to be allocated somewhere. And so on Sunday night, I'll spend half an hour to an hour plugging in that stuff into the calendar. What can wait till later in the week? What needs to happen tomorrow? And yeah, it's literally just blocking all this stuff in, and then I change it all the time. So I always get to come into my office a little bit. I prefer to do this stuff on my computer than I do on my phone. So I essentially work from home, right? My home office is at my main base of operations. So I'm here a lot when I've got people working for me. They're out at other plots doing things. I can come home and go, oh my God, this one thing is taking too long. So I actually change my calendar day that's currently happening as it's happening. So if I see, okay, I only allocated 2 hours for this task, turns out it took 3.5, I will actually change that on my calendar and change it real time, and then bump things that I go, okay, you know what, I thought I could get to this other task today at 4. That's not looking like it's going to happen. So I'm always pushing it into the next day or the next couple days or whatever. And so I like that because I actually can look back on my calendar and I can really see what we got done in a week. And now that gives me a better frame of how long certain tasks take. And so I like that. It helps me plan better for the future. But I'm really finding this using the calendar keeps me on track.
So is it more just a reminder of this is what I have to focus on and this is what I don't have to focus on versus a religious adherence to I only have 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. to do this, and then at 2 p.m. bell rings and I'm doing something else?
Well, no, not really. It's like what because sometimes I'm at a certain job or doing a certain thing and we're getting into it. It's taking a bit longer, but I'm realizing, you know what? If we spend an extra hour here, we can just get it done. And so, yeah, no, I don't necessarily religiously, unless I'm committed to something from another person to being there at a specific time. Then, of course, that's a different story. But no, I move it around as it happens because in most cases, it's better to just get one task done than have to go back to it the next day. Travel. And that's the thing with being multi-locational with my farm is that it's generally speaking, it's better to get done as much as you can at that one particular plot so you don't have to go back to it the next day. So generally that's how I'm trying to do it. And so I'm moving things around on the calendar as that's happening.
Were you always this organized, or was this something that you evolved into because you're just like, oh my God, I got to figure this out. I'm overwhelmed?
Yeah, I evolved into it for sure. I was never this organized. God, no. At least the first 2 years of my farming, I was organized in some ways because I'd always had an interest in using spreadsheets. Like even when I was a tree planter, I used spreadsheets and stuff. But no, I've learned it. And, even this winter, I was down in Florida hanging out with this guy named John Reif, who runs this really cool operation in Orlando called the East End Market. And man, this guy was just inspiring to see how he managed his life because I often wonder, like, okay, I'm busy, but then I meet a guy like John who's got 2 kids, all kinds of other business endeavors, and somehow still maintains a social life. And I'm thinking, how the hell does this guy do it? Like, I'm thinking here that I'm busy. I meet a guy like him and I'm like, he's got 2 kids and he's doing all this crazy stuff. So, one thing I learned from him is, he's very organized and he really utilizes that technology. And when I was hanging out with him, he was using his smartphone for everything. He was texting with his smartphone, like by voice. So that's one thing I started doing that's actually, when you total up, it saves me a lot of time in the day. Because every time I got to stop and thumb out a text message, I got to stop doing something. So the more I've been doing this using Siri on my phone has been incredible because I can be walking and moving some hoses and some equipment while sending a text message. Or putting something into my calendar, remind me to do this, remind me of that. So it's multitasking in a way, but I've found that when you live this kind of lifestyle where you are crazy busy and you've chosen this lifestyle, I like this lifestyle because it's part of who I am and I like accomplishing a lot of things. You need to use this kind of stuff. There's no other way to do it if you don't. And so, at least not that I know of. And so this has been working and yeah, I just kind of learned this from other people, really.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those things that nobody ever thinks about when they go into farming or any other business, yet this is the stuff, these little hacks that can really save you, because if you're in a startup phase of any business, it's usually just you, and you only have so much time in a day, and you have to make forward progress, and it doesn't just become how much can you get done in a day, it's how efficiently can you do everything, so you don't necessarily do more, but you do what's important, and you don't do stuff that is just time wasting and not making you money or not moving you forward.
Yeah, oh, that's exactly it. I mean, this has become the premise of my system of farming, is like, you must focus on the tasks that pay you money. Sure, I'd love to basket weave all day, or, I actually enjoy pulling weeds. There's certain farm tasks that I like to do just for the sake of doing it. I love doing things like building new infrastructure and stuff, but it's like, no, you've got to first focus on getting the cash flow going, getting the steady income established, starting strong. That's really what I focus on my farm, is starting strong in the season, coming with a high target of revenue on a weekly basis. Get that going, and then focus on cleaning up and doing that other stuff. Because generally for me, once I'm past the setup phase, once I'm into mid-May, I'm pretty much just rolling the steady production. And that's the time that I can take to do some of those projects. I want to paint the interior of my house, but I can't do that stuff until I get into summer, really. So, it's things like that. I mean, and so that's when I focus on doing that other stuff. I mean, yeah, my place looks like a gong show right now. I would be embarrassed to have you come here and look at my place. There's crap laying around everywhere. But it's like, okay, what's important right now? I need to get my sites ready and prepped, get all my beds stale seed bedded, so that I can start planting out and get in rotations.
At the beginning of the season, you're saying all this is important. So when you're starting to prep beds for an upcoming season, what's the process that you go through with there to get everything ready to go, so when it comes time to direct seed into the ground, you're good to go?
Okay, so I'll take you through that process. And this has changed over the years, and there's a couple ways you can go about doing it. What I've done in the past is I basically used my rototiller a lot. So I would, so this isn't prepping new plots. This would be just going into plots that I've been farming for a couple of years. The beds are more or less formed on where they are. But I would go in bring my rototiller. I'd bring a truckload of compost. I can only fit about a yard or a little bit less than a yard of compost in the back of my little mini truck. And that's generally enough to get most of the beds at say a 2,000 square foot site. So I put, 2 buckets of compost on each 25-foot bed. I put a little bit of organic fertilizer in there. Sometimes it's a blood meal. Sometimes it's a broad spectrum one called Gaia Green. It's a 444. So I put a little bit of that on the beds, and then I would rototill that stuff into the soil. And then that would be a lot quicker with the rototiller. But the problem with the tiller is, like, I'm sure this audience hears many times all the criticisms of rototilling, and I definitely won't defend rototilling. But one thing I will say about tilling is that it makes it a hell of a lot faster to prep beds. The problem with it that I see on the production end, and so forget all the stuff you hear about destroying the microbes and all that stuff that's bad for the soil, and I agree that it is bad for the soil. But the most impractical reason the most practical reason to not till is because of weed pressure, because soil is essentially a bank of weed seeds from hundreds of years. Every time you rototill it, you invert the layers and you bring up all these weed seeds and you create more problems for yourself. So now what I'm doing, and it's more time consuming, but basically I'm going into these sites. The beds have already been formed. I'm broad forking. I'm using a broad fork, which is basically a heavy duty pitchfork with 2 handles that has blades that are about 12 inches long. And it's the width of my bed. So, it's about 27 inches. My bed's at 30 inches. So we step on this thing and just loosen the soil, basically. So we're just kind of loosening the subsoil. We're not inverting it or bringing soil up or anything like that. And we're doing that. So it might take one person 2 hours to broad fork a 2,000 square foot plot. And then we're bringing in the compost on the beds, bringing in the fertilizer on the beds. Then I take a tool called a tilther, which is, it's like a mini rototiller, but it only tills the top inch of the soil. So basically what it's doing is mixing in those ingredients into the soil and making a nice, clean, and fine seed bed that's good to seed into. Because, once soil's been compacted over the winter, it's not, you won't get as nice germination if you seed into it. So this basically mixes in the ingredients into the top layer, but it's not rototilling because it's not inverting the soil layers. It's only loosening the top inch. Then I rake the beds flat with a landscape rake, and then I use another specialized tool called a seedbed roller, which is basically just like a big cylinder that has a weight on it, and I roll it over the beds, and it makes it just compacts them just ever so slightly, so that they're firm and the seeder runs through it well, and it also levels them out. And then basically I water them in really heavily, and then I put a tarp over it for about 2 weeks. And so what happens there is that this tarp, which is black on the top, encourages weed growth. And so any weeds that were in those top layers are going to germinate and sprout up. And so when I pull that tarp off in 2 weeks, I'll have all these tiny little germinated weeds there. And then I go in with a flame weeder, and it's basically a 5-torch. It has 5 torches, and it has a wheel on it, and it's the width of one of my beds, and has a propane tank. I feel like one of the Ghostbusters when I take this thing out, but I light it up and I walk it right over the beds. It doesn't hurt the soil at all because it only burns the top millimeter or 2 of soil, and it toasts those little germinated weeds. And now I have a completely clean, completely weed-free seed bed. So that's what a stale seed bed is. And so now I'm direct seeding right into those beds, and when my crops come up, there's not a single weed in there.
So that's the main strategy of switching over to no-till. Are you doing that on all of your plots and all of the beds?
Yeah, everything. I'm not rototilling at all anymore. Actually, that's not entirely true. I'm rototilling. I use my rototiller when I'm prepping new plots because it's just practical. Like, maybe that might be a subject for another show, but to turn over my plots like I've got a new plot that I'm getting into production. It was lawn, it's being rototilled and raked out and all this kind of 7-stage process I go through. I use the tiller for that because it's practical. So I basically have to hurt the soil a little bit for a while, but then I can build it back, get that invasive grass out, and then I'm good to go. So having said that, I still do rototill my areas that I call bi-rotation areas. So on my urban farm, there is no single bed on my farm that only has 1 crop per season. Everything at the very least has 2 crops per season, and those are called bi-rotation areas. So there's a primary crop in there that might be like a tomato or a patty pan squash, and then there'll be a secondary crop which might have been planted before that main one went in or after. So those bi-rotation areas, I'm also doing this landscape fabric technique where I'm actually landscape fabricing the beds. So those ones I'll rototill. So I've got an area of kale planted out just last week, and I rototilled those beds just because it was faster. I actually used the tilther to put in the compost and stuff because then I just kept it in the top inch, which I like. But then I put this landscape fabric over top of the beds. It has holes that I've burned in there with a little tiger torch every 10 inches. And then I transplant my kale in there. So my kale beds won't have any weeds because there's landscape fabric covering everything. So they'll just be the crop. And then I've got drip irrigation under that. So those types of plots, I'll rototill just because it's faster to get it into production, and because there's going to be a landscape fabric or I've got a compostable plastic mulch I'm using now as well. So the weed pressure is an issue there.
Since your high rotation beds have a lot of quick growing crops in them, and they're planted at a high density, so they get a quick canopy, do you have to worry about weed pressure in there? Like, will a bed of radishes choke out weeds? Will they grow faster than the weeds so that it's not a problem?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So stale seed bedding, and that's part of the strategy here too, is like that's where stale seed bedding, you got to look at, because it is quite a process to do that. So I don't need to stale seed beds that are going to be radishes at all. Generally speaking, at the beginning of the season, I'm just stale seed bedding everything because I'm just prepping all these areas and just putting one big tarp over 10 or 20 beds at a time. So it just makes sense there. And And, I don't want a rototiller anyways, don't want to invert the soil because it'll actually just make less weed pressure for me throughout the season. But you're exactly right. Like, a bed of radishes grows so fast that it's going to choke out the weeds. And weeds in a radish bed don't really interfere with the crop anyways. They'll interfere with the plot if those weeds go to seed, but that probably won't happen in a bed of radish. However, in a bed of greens that I cut multiple times, I don't want to have weeds because then I got to pick those weeds out when I harvest the crop. So probably the only crops where where weeds don't really matter are, like what you just said, radishes and turnips are sort of the quicker growing root crops that I generally will crop out the entire bed at a time at once, and then who cares if there's the odd weed in there because it's going to get turned over and replanted again anyways. But for all the greens and carrots, it's very important. For beets, it's important as well. So yeah, it's just a few crops that it doesn't really make a difference.
So for somebody who prides themselves on efficiency and doing things in a systematic way, do you think that the extra work of going to do all the no-till will save you a lot of time down the line from weed pressure and having to control those weeds manually?
Well, that's the experiment. That's the experiment. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I think that it will. I mean, I already like the result as far as the way the soil looks, because I know when I rototill, you basically like fluff up this soil. It's like putting soil in a blender, basically. It really fluffs up. And then, especially in heavy clay soils, what happens is you till it, and then over the course of the next few days or even a week, it starts to compact, especially when you get rain or irrigation or anything like that. Compacts down and it forms this crusty layer on the top that almost forms like concrete, and it really affects your germination as well. So I think, there's things you can do to combat that. Like, one thing you can do is when you rototill is you water the beds right away, like immediately. That's a way to solve that or keep the soil damp. But I think that's the experiment, and that's the key, Diego, is that, I never want to stop learning with this, because I think I'm pretty good at this now, but I don't think I'm a master, and I don't know if I ever will be a master. I know farmers that have been farming for 30 years, and they still say they learn something new every year. And so that's kind of what I like about farming. And so I just want to keep learning, and I just think this is part of the process. And, it also comes from a lot of feedback that, I've met, hundreds and thousands of people over the years traveling, talking about farming, and no-till is something that a lot of people talk about. And so I'm interested to explore those possibilities and see where they do lead me. If we might talk in July, and I might say, you know what, it's not even worth the effort, forget it. I'm open to that. I'm not going to close off any other options. Everything is on the table, and I've done certain things in the past that I've said, yeah, this is a waste of time. I'm not going to do this anymore. So we'll see.
Do you have a worry of taking on a new strategy on all of the plots versus trying to strategically do it on one plot, see how it works there, and then if it works, replicate it out?
Yeah, possibly, but so far this isn't really taking me that much extra time. It really isn't. So, because this is the beauty of the scale of my farm. I only have 100 beds on my farm. So, it doesn't, so far, it really only looks like it takes about 30 or 40% longer to prep those beds. So, I don't think it's going to be that much of a big deal, especially when I can see right away some of the benefits to the soil. I can see it right away. And I know that having my fertility available in that top inch, and that's what I'm doing with the tilther, that's going to help me with water retention. It's going to help me with having nutrients available to those crops when they're young. And so I can already see some of the benefits right away. Just forget what I think might happen with the weeds and what I think is going to happen with the soil in the long term. But I think right now I can already see two benefits in there right away. So I like the process too, because frankly, hauling around my BCS rototiller, which weighs 400 pounds, is kind of a pain in the ass in my situation because I have 5 locations. I got to load that thing into my truck, and I used to carry it around on my bike trailers, and I still do sometimes. But it's quite a bit of schlepping. You know, with this tilther, this thing's light. I can put this on I can take all of my no-till equipment and my seeding equipment on my bike trailer and go to a plot with my bike. I already like that. And it's quiet. It's just the sound of a drill. You know, the tiller's loud. It runs on gas. It's heavy. You know, I can't do tilling past 5 o'clock because it pisses off the neighbors. You know, there's already other benefits outside of what this will do to the soil that is going to be positive in the community. And the fact that it's a small scale tool that's quiet is already, I think, is a good thing as well.
On the plots that you've tilled for a while, did you notice any sort of hard pan where the tines would, you know, kind of ride along at whatever the ultimate depth was, 8 inches or however deep you were going?
Totally. Yeah, hard pan happens. Frankly, I find there's a little bit too much paranoia about hard pan in the organic community because the reality is most annual vegetables root systems are shallow. They're not going much deeper than 5 inches. In the case of carrots and some beets and maybe some other root vegetables, it's true. But hard pan isn't a hard thing to fix. Like, you don't even need a broad fork to fix your hard pan. You can just take a normal pitchfork, drive it into the center of your beds, and just loosen it up a little bit, and you'll solve your hard pan. Frankly, I haven't seen long-term negative effects from tillage. And this is why, like, I have been skeptical of the no-till stuff for many years, is because everybody says all these things. I mean, the one thing I do know for certain is the weed pressure. For certain, I can see that. I can tell you, guaranteed. I've observed this over time. But everybody says, oh, rototilling destroys your soil. You know, there'll be no worms. There's no microbiology. I don't see that. I've been rototilling, and I don't excessively till though either. You know, I till in the spring. Typically, not this year, but I'd till in the spring. I might till once or twice mid-season, but often I would still do a lot of no-till stuff just by hand. But I haven't seen the adverse effects of tillage because it was a way for me to change the composition of my soil really quickly. So, you know, I've got these soils that they're not great. Like, they're just kind of crappy soils that were growing lawn. And they're often either really heavy clay or they're really sandy. Like, there's nowhere do I have a nice loam soil. It's all like pretty marginal at best soil. And so I found the tiller worked really well because when I wanted to change that composition of the soil, whether to bring in organic material to get water retention or to add drainage or just build in organic matter to bring more nutrient into the soil, the tiller was a really fast way to do it because I could just dump on a bunch of organic stuff, compost or whatever it is, and till it in and immediately change the physical composition of the soil. So, and frankly, I've never had worms leave my beds. I've got worms in all of my beds all the time. I look in the soil, I see tons of microbiology. So I don't see what people claim that tillage does. I get it when we talk about the Midwest and we've got, you know, 1,000-acre areas that are all being rototilled and then that just turns into a dust bowl. I get that for sure. That makes sense. But in my context, I'm tilling a bed. I'm tilling a single bed. The walkways aren't really getting tilled. The perimeters aren't getting tilled. It's a 62 and a half square foot area out of, you know, and there'll be, say, 20 of those or 18 of those in a 2,000 square foot area. I don't see those adverse effects. I just think there's a lot of paranoia and a lot of misinformation out there about it because, you know, somebody posts something on Facebook and then it's like, oh yeah, this is a pandemic problem. Shame on farmers who rototill. But the reality is, if you're eating organic vegetables, you're getting them from farmers that rototill. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. If you have bad soil and you try and go a no-till route from day one, that's a tough road to go down. I know just from experience out here, you've seen the soil that I have on this property, it would be very hard to tackle with just a fork and a shovel to go out there. If you could get beds established with a tiller, I think you'd save yourself a lot of time, and you'd get way more organic matter, like you said, introduced into the soil and start building that soil from day one versus just trying to tackle it with non-petroleum based means. So I get the value of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's also a thing like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a technology that works. It's not perfect, but it works. And I find I often can compare it to sort of like the pharmaceutical drug industry. I never take pharmaceuticals, but you know what? If I lost an arm in an accident, give me the damn drugs, right? Like, get me through this, give me the drugs, and then I'll think about, a more holistic approach after that. But I think like when it comes to situations like what you're talking about, and even from what I've seen in Southern California or even Baja, Mexico, you've got these soils that are hard packed, like heavy mineral soils that it's like chiseling in concrete. Like you can't get anything into it. So a tiller in that case, as long as you wet the soil down, soften it up a bit, tiller, you can get in there and you can work it and you can make some progress fast. Whereas you go in there with just hands, you're going to have 10 permablitzes in your backyard with 10 people. That's going to be a lot of nights giving away people pizza and beer, where you could get a tiller in and probably get the job done yourself in 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm with you there. In regards to these beds that you're prepping, is it warm enough up there now where you can start direct seeding in certain crops, or is the soil temp not high enough to get efficient germination on everything?
Oh yeah. I'm direct seeding outside right now, as of this week officially. I've been direct seeding in my unheated greenhouses for, since late February. But I can start direct seeding in the ground now. And the trick here is basically understanding what germinates best at each time of the season. So I'm not going to go and direct seed beets outside or, bush beans or something like that. I don't grow bush beans anyways, but that's just an example of something that likes warm soil. I'm going to be direct seeding things like spinach, arugula, radishes, turnips, things that will germinate in cool soil and like cool soil. Like even a lot of the Asian greens like tatsoi and mustard greens, those things like cool soil and they'll germinate as long as you don't get a lot of freezing. But we've got freezing temperatures coming up this week overnight, just for 2 nights really as the full moon approaches. We often get these cool nights for that period in the spring. But I'm not worried about frost affecting those crops. I don't care. It's irrelevant. That's the whole thing is a lot of gardeners and farmers, especially up here, or even in most cold climates in North America, people say, oh, you can't plant your garden out till mid-May or, after the May long weekend, they say here in Canada. But it's nonsense. It's like, yeah, don't put your tomato transplants out then. Don't plant your bush beans, but plant lots of stuff if it can handle the frost. And those are some of those cold weather crops that I mentioned. And so that's a lot of what I'm direct seeding now. I actually am going to be direct seeding some carrots out in the field as well, but those will go under poly low tunnels. So there'll be a little bit of protection there. It's not so much about protection. It's more just about getting it really warm during the day and creating an ideal kind of humid, warm temperature for germination and getting that established than it is necessarily protecting it from the cold.
What's the advantage of going with the poly low tunnel versus just stretching agribon or remay out over a row and staking it in? Like why have the frames?
I find that remay and agribon stuff is just garbage. It just becomes landfill after 2 years. It's hard to maintain it. I've used it. I still have some of it that I just won't even use anymore because it just especially when you get cold temperatures, it'll freeze to the ground and then you pull it off and then it'll rip and then you got chunks of the stuff everywhere. I just don't like it. I just find it's garbagey. It doesn't last very long. Whereas I've basically set up a system where I use these little low tunnels. They're basically 10-foot lengths of electrical conduit. It's 1/2-inch electrical conduit, and I bend it, and Actually, if people go on my Facebook page, if they go through my pictures, I've got a picture of me bending these. I made my own bender out of wood. It's really simple. So I was doing these hoops with Agribon or Remay or whatever you want to call it before, but I just run into these problems where the stuff would rip and it just didn't last very long and it got dirty. And so I just started thinking, well, why don't I just use greenhouse plastic? And so I'd buy 20-foot wide greenhouse poly, 100-foot lengths, and I basically unroll it into a open area, and it's folded in a way where you can just run a scissor or a pair of scissors right down the middle of it and split it into two 10-foot wide lengths. And so that's what I can use to cover these tunnels. And I find it's better because I've had the same poly tunnels for 5 years, going on 6 years now, and they still work. And whereas Remay and Agribon, no way it would last that long. And I like the results of this better too because it keeps off precipitation, which I like, especially in the fall when I want to establish overwintered crops. Like I want to keep carrots in the ground all winter. I want to keep spinach in the ground, things like this, or kale. I don't want winter precipitation, whether it be rain or snow, getting in that soil, because if the soil gets wet and then we drop down to freezing, the soil freezes, and then when it thaws, all that crop turns to mush. So if I keep the precipitation off, I have a far better chance of keeping these crops going in the winter. So I just find overall it's a better result. It attracts more heat during the day. Yes, there's a little bit less airflow, which is a challenge, but you can open up the ends and clip them open. That's what I do. And it works. I find it just works better.
A lot of the work that you're doing now, it's not just you doing the work. You're actually in the process of training a new employee on your farm. How's that process going? And tell us again about why you decided to bring another person on.
Yeah, the process is going well. I enjoy working with people. So, I mean, that's one reason. The other is I have a lot of other projects going on, and it just kind of gets tiring doing it by yourself all the time, frankly. But I'm trying to set myself up so that I can make a little bit easier of a lifestyle for myself. I've been really grinding it out for the last 5 years. Granted, it's gotten easier each year, and last year was a very balanced lifestyle I had with the farm. Mind you, I still had a part-time employee. But this year I'm working with somebody who's going to be full-time, and so the objective there is to free myself up a little bit more. Maybe I can skip a couple farmers markets a month where he can do them. Maybe I can go on a camping trip or two in the summer, which is pretty hard to do when you're farming. Just kind of create a bit more of a balanced lifestyle. And so I'm at a place now where I can afford to take the chance. And it's not so much that, it's this, that I have systems. And unless you have systems, it's really hard to train people. And so one thing I'm finding that's very helpful for training people is you've got to have, a specific way to do certain things so that you can communicate it clearly to somebody. If you don't know how to communicate what you want them to do, it's hard to make use of them. So I've got him learning some very specific things that I'm going to hand off as to, okay, you're going to take this on as a responsibility each week, like planting microgreens or harvesting some things. And we've actually been using some technology as well, using Google Sheets so I can post tasks like go to this plot and do this. And so there's always kind of a list of things to do to kind of make it easier. But it's just about creating more balance. And before when I didn't have as many systems, taking on an employee was a pretty big risk for me because labor costs can really eat up your profit, which is essentially my wage at the end of the day. And I was less likely to take that risk then because my farm income was so important to me. Now my farm income is less important to me because I have other projects going. Having said that, I don't think that anybody has to get to a place like where I am, where I'm writing books and doing lectures to be able to hire employees on the farm. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that if you're going to do it and take employees, it's good to have systems that you can help communicate them with. And so, listening to this show and sourcing high-grade information is going to be something that's going to help people find those systems to communicate to others easily.
I totally hear you there, and there's a lot more on this. We can touch more on that next week. I also want to get into the whole concept of early stage farm income. How do you bridge the gap over the winter season as you transition into spring, where you're in a situation like yours where the first market's just coming up, there's a lot of work being done on the farm, but you're not actually really taking in a whole lot of income. There might be some sales, but we'll touch on more of that next week. Good luck at the market this weekend, and have fun farming.
Awesome. Thanks, Diego.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Urban Farmer. For links, video, and more information about The Urban Farmer Show, visit permaculturevoices.com/TUF3. Stay tuned for next week's show, where Curtis will talk about hiring a new employee, and we'll find out how his first farmer's market went. And here's a preview of next week's show, where Curtis talks about how urban farms can actually be very competitive in the commercial farm landscape.
This is where the huge potential advantage for local and urban farmers will be going forward, is that with small-scale agriculture, there doesn't need to be massive fluctuations in prices because the overhead for inputs is very small. So this, in time, will make local farms very competitive in the open market, as to even the big, San Joaquin Valley, California farms that are sending produce up here for next to nothing. But, as the water is inevitably going to have to get more expensive, prices here will stabilize compared to what's coming from down there.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.